Okay, good morning. Our topic for today would be the continuation of the previous lecture last week about environmental hazard from waste and pollution. So before we proceed, let us do some review about the definition of waste. Okay, what are waste? Waste are also known as rubbish, trash, refuse, garbage, junk, litter, or any unwanted or useless materials. Okay, it could be unwanted substances or toxins that are spilled from living organisms and from other sources. Okay, based on the Basel Convention, the definition of waste would be substances or objects which are disposed of or are intended to be disposed of or are required to be disposed of by the provision of the law. Disposal means anything operation which may lead to resource recovery, recycling, reclamation, direct reuse, or alternative uses. Okay, so these are some of the definition about waste. There are several types of waste depending on where it is generated and depending on the characteristics. So some waste are considered as industrial as compared to agricultural waste. Industrial waste are those waste that are produced or generated from industrial activities, while agricultural waste are those that are produced from agricultural production systems. So for example, in a factory, they would be producing different kind of waste from plastics, excess raw materials, okay, even excess energy are considered industrial waste. For example, another example, say in Moropoli power plant, they are producing industrial waste in the form of fly ash, in the form of exhaust to the atmosphere. While in agricultural waste, some example would say this in the picture, if you see in the slides, these are the crop residues. Or in, say, in a slaughterhouse, the blood, those non-edible parts of the cow after it is slaughtered are called agricultural waste. Rejected crops or produce. For example, those tomatoes that are not looking good, that are not acceptable in the market, are actually considered as agricultural waste. Okay? Now, you would also encounter the word hazardous waste. These hazardous waste are those waste that could produce hazard to humans, immediate hazard. So almost all of those industrial or agricultural waste could be hazardous, but the degree of the hazard could, okay, vary from one material to the other. So recently we have different types of waste, such as the radioactive waste. Okay, so this radioactive waste are those that are emitting, okay, radiations. Okay, and these radiations could could disrupt the functioning of a living organism. Okay, so there are also the form of medical waste. These are also hazardous waste. Okay, that's considered hazardous waste because these waste are produced from medical institutions such as hospitals, clinics, veterinary hospitals, human hospitals, okay, and even pharmaceuticals. Okay, these mostly are composed of, say, antibiotics, blood samples. It may contain, say, infectious organisms that are infectious. So those are the form of medical waste. And this is also a very hazardous type of waste. Okay, so there are many conventions on how we classify waste. Okay, now the next thing is we have to understand how these waste are generated. Okay, waste, as I have mentioned earlier, are generated depending on the sources and depending on the type of these sources. For example, waste are generated from the variety of sources, from household, in your dormitories, even in your own room, from commercial establishment, from industrial processes or agricultural practices, and even from mining or all these forms. It could be in a small scale or medium or large scales, okay? But in general, we could calculate waste based on a per capita basis, per person, right? So for example, in your exercise 2, which would be done on Monday, you are going to learn how to estimate how much waste is generated per person in a household or in a dormitory, or the average waste that could be produced by one person per day in Palapye or the whole Botswana. So estimating how the waste is generated is an important tool for waste management. Okay, it is a very important tool on how we could manage waste. Without knowing on how waste are generated, on how much waste are generated, then would be impossible for us to design an effective waste management. Okay, so we have to understand how these waste are generated. Okay, so in this slide, you would see, okay, a typical example of industrial waste. Okay, so industrial waste, if you compare this industrial waste compared to the household waste, you would notice the variation. Okay, the variation. For example, for industrial waste, these are produced from factories, mining operation mills. Okay, it would vary. The composition of the waste would vary from one factory, from one industrial activity to others. So what is the implication for this one? It would mean that in doing waste management, there is no general solution. You understand? There's no general solution that could cover every kind of waste from different activities. Okay? So you cannot find a general solution because the waste composition would vary from one source to the other, from one institution to the other, from one municipality to the other. For example, if you look at the waste generated by Moropoly Power Plant B, is actually different from the waste generated in Moropoly A, right? They are the same institution, but the plant in Moropoly B generates different waste than in Moropoly B. The same thing if you're looking at BCL mine, their waste, as you have observed when we had the tour in 2 years ago, when you in your ENV is 202, right? 201. So the waste generated in BCL is different from the waste generated by Mopani Gold Mine, right? So although they are engaged on mining, the composition, the extent, okay, the hazard that would be produced, the hazard associated with the waste produced by this institution should command an specific strategy. So, in order for us to be able to design an effective waste management, then it is important that we understand the extent how these waste are generated, what is the volume, okay? And we even have to understand where these waste are coming from within the whole process, okay? So that is an important that is the importance of understanding how we should gather the data on how these waste are generated. So, for example, if you compare, okay, this one, the composition of industrial waste, more of paper, trimmings, metals, glass, plastics, very small amount of food scraps and others. And then if you compare the composition of waste in the municipal waste, right? Municipal waste are entirely different. It would have entirely different composition. If you look at the picture, right? If you look at the picture here, the waste would be more of one-use plastics, and then kitchen refuse, papers, okay? So municipal waste are entirely different from industrial waste and agricultural waste, because these are generated from the household, commercial or institutional activities, and usually it is not very much hazardous. In fact, these are all considered as the trash or garbage. They could be recycled, or there are some things that could be recovered from this. Okay, so mostly municipal waste are dumped on landfill. Okay, but there are still some resources that could be, okay, recovered from municipal waste. Okay, now in contrast, agricultural waste would also have a different composition compared to those in industrial and municipal waste. So, example of the form of agricultural waste: excess chemical fertilizers, pesticides, okay, and then crop residues are part of the waste from agriculture. Even the plant products or harvest itself. Okay, these are some of the examples. And usually agricultural waste are least hazardous, except for pesticides, agricultural chemicals. Okay. Most of the residues, the animal and the crop residues, are actually could be converted into valuable resources. For example, in some high skill for agricultural production area, for example, a banana plantation, a pineapple plantation, a grapes plantation, okay, some of the waste are actually converted into useful products such as fertilizer or compost, or even, for example, in banana plantation in the Philippines, those rejected bananas are converted into ketchup or sauce, banana sauce. Okay, so they're already basically considered as waste, but then they are converted into valuable resources, or they are converted, for example, into energy, such as bioethanol production or methane or biogas production. Okay, so those are some strategies in handling agricultural waste, and mostly in general, agricultural waste are less hazardous compared to industrial or other form of waste. Okay. Now, the next group that is gaining much attention now is what you call the biological or biomedical waste. Okay? Yes? Okay, can I continue? Okay. So biomedical waste, by definition, it is waste generated during diagnosis, testing, treatment, research, or production of biological products for human or animal. So even here in the university, we are producing biomedical waste. Those that are produced in the biology department when they are doing DNA extraction, right? Those, the waste generated from that activity is actually considered as biological waste. Okay, so hospitals generate the biological waste. So the composition of biomedical waste are actually very wide. Okay, it is in different forms. Okay, so biomedical waste also needs special treatment. In fact, biomedical waste are considered a biohazard. It contains different form of chemicals that could cause diseases, that could cause, say, cancer, or that would cause mutation. Okay, and it may also contain organisms that may spread diseases. Okay, so just example, if you look at the waste generated by Lotsani Clinic near here in our community, it's very dangerous because those waste may contain the organism that are causing TB, that are causing malaria, or that are causing this E. coli, the gastrointestinal diseases, right? So it needs a special attention. It needs a special processing. In fact, here in Botswana, biomedical waste are collected and incinerated. Okay, they are incinerated because that is very hazardous. Okay, so they cannot be, biomedical waste cannot be dumped on landfill, okay, because it contains biohazard materials. Okay, so the biomedical waste would also include low-level radioactive waste, especially those chemicals that are used on chemotherapy. Okay, so chemotherapy, it has some chemicals that are emitting radioactive substances. Okay, now by definition, we say bio or hazardous waste. Okay, it should present potential hazard to human environment, and it has no use already. It cannot be recycled. Okay, that's one feature when we talk about hazardous waste. Radioactive waste, okay, it produces radioactivity, okay, that could be that could harm organisms and human. Okay, so currently here in Botswana, there's a need for the investigation of the radioactivity from mining waste. Okay, so that's one area that has to be investigated here in Botswana, because once there are some materials that is high in radioactive activity that are being exposed during mining, which is part of the mine waste. So it needs to be investigated. So if you're thinking about some problems for your final project, then yeah, you can work on that one. Estimating the radioactivity in different mining waste in Botswana. That could be a good material to study. Okay. So radioactive waste, it contains unwanted radioactive, okay, and the concentration should be more than 100 BQ per gram. That's the limit. Okay, now there's another form of waste that should be given attention. Okay, these are what you call electronic waste or the e-waste. So in most countries, this is a very serious problem. Okay, so e-waste is generally discarded an old electrical device which can no longer be used. This basically include all the home appliances, electronic items like television, toaster, computers, printers, scanners, telephone, laptops, cell phones, monitor, fax, and all other items which become old and obsolete. Okay? In Korea, in Japan, in most industrialized countries, they have a big problem about this e-waste. Here in Botswana, it's not much, right? Because the population is not still very low. But in other densely populated areas, e-waste is a problem. In fact, we have a very big controversy. Some e-waste from Canada were shifted to the Philippines. And it was only discovered that when they are already in the ship that is carrying this e-waste, tons of e-waste from Canada was already in the port. And the Philippine government even had to ask the government of Canada to remove the waste, right? And this is a serious problem. China has a serious problem with this one. Okay, so here in Botswana, it's not yet a big problem because of the low population. Okay. So far, any questions? If you have questions, you can ask questions. Now, this is a schematic diagram of looking at the whole solid waste. All of this, okay, generated industrial, agriculture, these are called solid waste. Okay, the solid waste in general, we can classify into hazardous waste and non-hazardous waste. For non-hazardous waste, usually municipal solid waste are not considered. It's considered non-hazardous. Industrial solid waste are non-hazardous, except for those radioactive emitting substances. Okay, and then agricultural or animal waste. I just don't understand why medical waste are called non-hazardous. Okay, so medical waste actually is part of the hazardous waste. Okay, so for the hazardous waste, to classify hazardous waste, it has to undergo this different classification. There is a list of the materials that is called hazardous waste. If it is included there, then it becomes hazardous. For example, it's got emitting high amount of radioactivity, then it could be hazardous. It contains active microorganisms that are just like those from the medical waste, then it becomes a hazardous waste. So to classify waste, if it is hazardous or not, you should have to do characterization. Okay. For example, not all municipal solid waste are non-hazardous. There are some components that are considered hazardous. So you have to do classification after segregation. So this diagram is something misleading because it puts here that municipal solid waste, industrial solid waste, agricultural animal waste are non-hazardous. But in fact, there are components in industrial, municipal solid waste that are hazardous. Okay? That are hazardous. So classification of solid waste according to hazardous or non-hazardous pattern or group, you have to look at the chemical and biological characteristics. Okay? So another way to classify solid waste is in terms of looking at its biodegradability. Okay? For solid waste, you can roughly classify the waste into non-biodegradable and biodegradable waste. Okay? When we say non-biodegradable, so these substances that can be decomposed, or it would take a very long time to decompose. So example of these are plastics, these electronic products, waste, metals. Okay? So non-biodegradable waste could be classified further into recyclable and non-recyclable or reusable. Okay? So for example, plastics, some plastics could be recycled. Some metals could be, most of the metals could be recycled. Okay? So this still can be broken down into recyclable and non-recyclable. Okay. If you look at, say, an institution, okay? In an institution, if you do your exercise, for example, next week, you're going to do this, okay? You are to do the waste audit to determine how much waste, what type of waste are generated in a household or in a company or in a factory. So it is important to look at the pathway of how the waste are generated. So this is an example one here. So from the raw material to produce a product that will reach a consumer, okay? So this is the flow of the materials. From the source, from the manufacturing, you produce a product and you have, it will reach the consumer. The consumers would also produce, okay, something until it reaches the waste stage, okay? The waste stage. So in the company itself, it would, okay, produce waste from as an excess material. Some of this material could be reused, okay, or as a raw material again. Then you have the product here, and some of the waste also could be converted into product, okay, and it will reach the consumer. So in the production side alone, waste are generated, and in every step of the production process, you should be able to identify the waste, how the waste are generated. Okay? So it is important that you should know that. Okay? So that's one thing that you should know. So when you do, for example, in your exercise 2, you start with your own household. So you would be able to quantify how much waste you are generating per day. Okay, each of you. And then you should be able to quantify, to know where this waste is coming from and how much. For example, how much food waste you are generating. How much plastic you generate every time you eat, right? Then how much paper waste you generate per day? How much water you generate? Well, if you want to include this one. But if you're only talking about solid waste, right? How much bottle or how much tin cans are you generating per day or per week? Okay? So, and you can even outline where you generate, what type of activity you are generating. So for example, another example, if you are investigating or doing a waste audit in a hotel, you look up what are the activities in the hotel, right? So the hotel offers room services, the hotel have a restaurant, and of course, if the hotel has a restaurant, it has a kitchen, right? So you look at the different activities done in that institution. And then you can now look up on what are the type of waste generated and how much. For example, if it has a restaurant, then you would notice that they're generating, say, food scraps, okay, food leftovers in the restaurant. Then you can weigh how much. They are also generating tissues, table napkins, right, in that restaurant. So that is how you do waste audit. And it is very important, okay, to know how much waste and how it is being generated. Okay, so in the next slide, this is an example of how to determine waste in a factory. Okay, so these are some, okay, of the sources where waste are generated. So waste is anything other than the minimum amount of equipment, materials, parts, and even working time, which is absolutely essential to add value to the product or services. Okay, so there are key waste that where waste are generated. Okay, the first one mostly is waste are generated due to overproduction, right? Waste are generated due to overproduction. For example, even in the farm or in a factory, in a food factory, if you have overproduction, waste could be generated. If you are producing too much than the consumer can consume, right? And that is overproduction, actually you are generating waste. Why? Because these products have expiration. Once these products expire, it becomes a waste. Understand? So overproduction is the main, okay, the main contributor to waste generation. Okay, another time here, overprocessing. Overprocessing would result to what? Reject or defects of product. Overprocessing would mean overuse of energy, right? And resources. You are using too much electricity, then you are generating waste. It could be off-site waste. You are using too much energy in electricity, or electrical waste or heat energy waste, okay, due to overprocessing. At the same time, your products could be rejected. Okay. In contrast, weighting could also produce, okay, waste, right? Because once even time, okay, some of the material, weighting means you are inefficient, okay? Inefficiency would lead to waste generation. Understand? Inefficiency would lead to waste generation. Transportation would also produce waste, okay? From the fuel use to fuel and energy, right? You're generating waste, and even for the, say, the what you call that? The the transport system itself, tires, used oil, right? You are generating waste for that one. So in as much as possible, okay, you have to look at how much volume of waste are produced in this process, okay? Inventory or stocks is also a source of waste because there are stocks that are overstaying, becomes unusable, okay? Too much stock would lead to waste. If you are stocking, you are procuring too much raw materials than the capacity of the production, then that means you would be generating waste. Okay, movement, evolution would also result to waste, and then defects. Okay, depends on the quality standard. Okay, for example, in the food production, okay, from the appearance to the quality, defects will always be present. Those who will not pass the quality standard are considered waste. Okay, so the more the stringent, okay, the quality standard, the more waste that could be produced. So defects and the production process, okay, would go hand in hand. If the production process is not efficient, if the production process does not produce the right quality, then you are generating more waste. And the more waste that are generated, that means the more cost you are incurring in your production system. You understand? So waste should be translated as equal to production cost, right? You should know that. So if you are producing 1 ton of waste in your production area, that means you are wasting 1 ton of raw materials. If you could, okay, reduce the waste from 1 ton to 0.5 ton, that means you are saving a lot of resources, and the value would be very big. It has an exponential implication. You save your raw materials and you save the environmental cost of your production system. Okay, so here also you could see creativity. Creativity could either increase the waste generated or decrease the waste generated. For example, of creativity, the packaging, the style of packaging. If you look at on the Japanese market are very particular on the appearance of the product, okay? The packaging of the product. And you would know that if the packaging of the product becomes very sophisticated, then it is generating waste, okay? It is generating waste, okay? So it is really important that when you do waste assessment